Matt Whiteley, welcome to the show.
Hey, buddy.
Good to have you on, especially after we got connected because you did an AMA on Reddit, and I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. I want to interview this guy and dig into it. So let's kick things off with something pretty spicy. What makes a business a category king or queen, and how do you design for that?
I think everything like this starts with having a unique point of view. So in the lockdown, ironically, we were forced to kind of stop and ask ourselves this exact question purely by accident from finding Play Bigger by Christopher Lockhead, which is a pretty cool book. In the broader sense, a category king or queen is someone who just owns a lot of their market. So think of like an Uber versus a Bolt, for example, in Europe, a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Nike, a Reebok. I know they're not, you could argue, exact examples, but there typically is somebody who dominates their entire market. And what the book and Christopher Lockhead, who was a consultant, who he would go into old and new businesses and get them thinking in like a different way from inception, or to turn around how a traditionally kind of slow incumbent business would operate. He would again start asking them things like, what's your unique perspective? What's your unique point of view? And I think it's Peter Thiel who has a similar expression, which is like what do you believe that no one else believes to be true? It's a little bit like that. And it's quite cool because it gets you thinking like, why are we doing this way? Or are we literally just doing it the same way as everyone else? Surprise, surprise, if you're doing this thing the same way as everyone else, you're going to find some stiff competition, some difficult questions. And life's going to get quite tricky when you're having to literally explain why your thing is better than the other thing when from the outside it's pretty much the same. So that's kind of the general premise of it. Worst case scenario, I would suggest that everyone just reads that, because in the worst case, you're going to have some ideas. Probably it's going to stimulate some interesting thoughts. For us, it helped us build the outcomes where we win most of the time. So that would be the best way to explain it. How can we, or you, as a business owner, as a product builder, design like an environment where you can win most of the time? And by win, I mean explain to a potential buyer that the reason why the thing that you have is better than the next thing. And typically that comes down to something that the other thing doesn't have, even if it's just a belief. That's the crazy thing. Even if the way you believe it should be approached is just aligned better with that individual's need, that alone is better. That's enough to get things going. Beyond that, you would need to have the product doing the things that you believe. We believe moving things from A to B should be easy. Okay, well, how is it easy? And there's your kind of on-ramp. If it's very, very dry and tell us what you want to move from here to here, and there is no belief, there's no perspective, there's no viewpoint, it also means that you've probably not understood the viewpoint of your buyer either. So what's their perspective? And does all that align? It's kind of like dating in a weird way. You're sort of trying to do a little bit of a dance and see if what you believe resonates with what they believe, and can you work together? We've spoken to who knows how many different third-party providers to help us build some of the stuff that we use in our products, and you could just work with certain people way better. That is obviously individualistic to the person, but there's a culture and a belief system in the business itself that seems to permeate through everything that company does. And you get a vibe for that. I think people can pick up on that quite well. So in a nutshell, that the category king, category design is like, what little world do you want to make for yourself? Who are you talking to and who are you inviting into your little world? And then whenever someone visits your little world, what do they see? What do they feel? What emotions do they get? Like, what's the vibe when talking to you? Is it fun? Is it cold? Is it boring? Is it serious? Is it trustworthy? All that comes into then the design side as well. So you can see how there's a really nice segue there into how do I showcase my point of view or our business's point of view? And then we can start to get into the design side of things from there.
I did want to ask you about that actually, because your website is amazing. It's really good. I want to, yeah, we'll come back to that in a moment. But just to make sure I'm understanding clearly, so if you kind of take this kind of somewhat theoretical idea of what emotions do people feel, what do I want people to think, what is the unique experience that someone's going to have when they enter my world, how do you bring that back down to earth in terms of like a tangible practical step? If someone is in if someone's listening to this or watching this and they're in a very competitive space, and they've just built a better mousetrap. And I see this all the time with SaaS founders. They built exactly the same feature set at exactly the same price point as like 20 other competitors, and they're like, well, how do I get more customers? What would you say to someone in that position? How do you take that idea of being a category king or queen and distill it down into a tangible, practical action that someone can take? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can only ever speak from our experience of building for niche industries and niche client bases. There's another piece here, which is what's the need like? Is it so essential, or are there bits of the product that are more essential than others? And fundamentally, the business should need to be able to stand up based on the way it handles things, the way it does things, I should say, and not based on just doing the same thing that the guy next door does or the girl next door does for 40 pence per month cheaper. I think generally you're not in a great spot if that's what you're up against. Not to sort of downplay anyone's efforts or anything, but having been there and made the mistakes of this stuff, we didn't want to be in that position again. To get down to your question about how to make this stuff a reality, the point of view is your approach to the problem. And what I love about SaaS and tech and founders and everything else is that everyone usually has their own approach, rightly or wrongly. And it means that even if you just go about this one thing slightly differently, you build it on a different stack, you decide to go native app or online, or, the way you brand it, like it could be any nuanced difference, the way you communicate it on the marketing side. That has to kind of come from somewhere. And it usually, if you ask yourself the right questions and bring it all the way back, it comes down to, why are we approaching this particular problem like this? I'd be amazed if every single thing that company A believed is the same as what company B believes. They'll probably have their differences, even if the product does the same thing. So the challenge then is, how do you make it so that you've understood the needs of your user well enough that align with your core beliefs, and you can kind of meet them in the middle and start some magic? And in a long time since I've read the book, I must admit, so we're talking like a good 4 or 5 years ago now. But he talks about you can label and brand your beliefs, which is what typically sparks these like bits of IP that would exist in a certain service. I'm trying to think of a good example now because he gives one in the book. I think it was Nike or somebody who created that self-tying lace tech. Now, we all know that there are a million different ways you could build something that self-ties shoes laces, but they phrased it, they trademarked it, they wrapped some category IP around it. So then in a SaaS perspective, the ideal situation that we always gunned for was we wanted a client who could come to us or could come to a comparable, similar product, but not quite as fit for purpose. Someone in the competitive landscape, let's say, and they could say to us, do you have this thing, the self-tying shoe tech? And say it by name, and then ask the same question to the other one. We would say, yes, of course we do. The other company would say, what the hell are you talking about? So straight away, you're competing in a space where the other person can't play. They can't operate in that space. It's not about features anymore. It's about beliefs. It's about unique IP that you have that they don't even know they needed. Again, this all sounds quite conceptual, so it's difficult to give exact examples, but it's really about finding the nugget of pain that buyer has, or the client has, I should say, and seeing if you can design a unique approach around that, and then branding on top of it. And if all that aligns with those beliefs, you can kind of shout that from the rooftop. And even if it's 10% of the product, which it probably likely is, we have some of that, and it is powerful stuff. but it's not the entire thing. But it means that when you do get into conversations about features and comparisons and why does this thing do this thing like this, we can always come back to that belief that then spawned these features that are ultimately designed to help the user. We're not doing it for all that. They're there for them, and not really for us. It helps us get business, but it's for them. We're serving them. So there's probably a broader question here, which is, how are you trying to do that? How are you serving people? Are you just in a feature war? Are you just racing your price to the bottom? And the book kind of gets you to challenge some of that and try and get out of that, because what it typically shows is those companies who are all just fighting for the same folks. It's a bit of a scramble. It's a bit of a mess. Somebody is going to emerge, and it's usually the incumbent, the one who's been there the longest. It's usually the one with the biggest bank balance. And if you're coming in with, neither of those things, just because you want to build a new browser extension for whatever, then it's probably not going to be an easy ride. But I guess we know that's the case anyway, right?
There's so many SaaS founders that I talk to. Like I said, they've just built a better mousetrap, and or they've built exactly the same mousetrap, but in a way that they thought is somehow better to them. That whole scratch and reach thing. I spoke to a guy named Aaron Cassover who spoke about that a while back. But I think that's probably a really good segue. So let's. I'm going to ask you a bit more about your business, Arcarta, in just a moment, because a little bit of context is probably helpful too. But first, I wanted to give you a fist bump from across the internet. So I think when we first met, you just hit $1 million a year in revenue. So congratulations. What is your secret sauce? Like, you're doing something right if you manage to get to that kind of a milestone. So what have you done differently or better than your competitors to be able to get to that milestone?
I would probably say, I know we just talked about it, but the category design piece I can't ignore that that's shaped our path, our direction in a market that needed something quite compelling to fix quite a niche problem. Beyond that, have an amazing co-founder. My co-founder's like, it would have been borderline impossible without having someone to share that load with. Beyond that, building a great team as well. We never work with like B players. We always hire A players, even if it means we can only have a certain amount of an A player's time. That's worth more than paying for something that we might be unhappy with at the end of it, or God forbid something actually goes wrong and breaks. You have to then spend and invest time and energy on repairing it and recovering from it, which is painful. The other thing is, don't be afraid to keep experimenting. Things working is good, and you don't want to rock the boat. Victim of being in the comfort zone here, but it's gonna he has to keep growing. And if no one's at the front kind of steering the ship, and you're too busy kind of down below faffing with the same stuff you were doing 2 years ago, there is a time where you're going to have to replace yourself, begin to delegate, which again is another challenge in itself, and then ultimately start to command it going in a different direction. So yeah, I think the biggest thing is having a really good co-founder.
When you're talking about experimentation, I had a conversation with someone a while back, and they were talking about the right time to experiment, because early on you don't have the resources to be too experimental, very early on you've got nothing to lose. So you can be as experimental as you want. You can completely redesign the product. You can completely, pivot towards a completely different customer. You can, decide, hey, we're going to go after enterprise now instead of small businesses. You can do whatever you want with the business because you're not that invested in it. You don't have that many customers to support. You haven't got any kind of legacy marketing collateral or anything around the place. Then you get in this period in the middle where you've got something that's working. You've got some product market fit, but you're not quite making enough money yet to be able to take any risks, and you sort of just need to keep on doing what works for a while. And then you get to a point where suddenly you can start taking risks again, calculated risks. But if you spend, I think the example that he gave was he spent 15 grand on an influencer marketing campaign. And if he was just in the middle of that grind, 15 grand, and he lost it all, it would have sunk the business. But now he's at a position where actually we can afford to place a lot of small bets and see what pays off. So he found that, like, in terms of the velocity of experimentation, really high at the beginning, then there's a lull in the middle, and then really high once you get to a point where you can actually afford to, spend some money. Has your experience been similar to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good point about when things start to work, but they're not quite working enough yet to give you the comfort, but you also still don't really know what it is that you've got and what the future looks like. That's a very, very interesting point, because you don't want to, you'd be foolish to spend everything that you've got resource-wise, but you still don't know which lever to pull, which buttons to push. You still don't know what's actually going to move the needle. From our experience, we've typically kind of trodden that ground by only doing one thing at a time, mainly because it allows us to be careful with our resources, especially in the early days. So you can say, we might hire this person, so why don't we look at a contractor first, look at how that would work, let's see what the P&L is like, let's see what the scope of work is like. I mentioned COVID. That, again, is a ropey situation where you wouldn't want to be just YOLOing into hiring 10 people. If you've got the funding, then how about it? I probably wouldn't do that. Then you find that actually your customer base is potentially dried up, or your sales team doesn't have anybody to go at, or, again, back to the belief side of things. Are you people who sell, or are you people who enable your customers to buy? There's subtleties here that translate into how you behave as a business. Now, we've never been foolish, sporadic, or, lackadaisy with our experimentation. It's been very, very methodical and clean, and usually targeted in a few areas. So for us, it was all about focus, small, focused, one thing at a time. And then the more we go along, we just keep conducting more small experiments until we find something that works. And I think the reality is that you're going to have to probably play around for quite a long time to find something that works for you. It pained me to hear that the 15 grand influencer campaign, because that's a lot of money. But again, if that's what it needs to learn the lesson and you can afford it, and it's not going to completely destroy the business, then you probably need to learn that lesson somehow. Could you do it for less than 15K? Possibly, but again, these are all situation specific. We spent a lot of money, especially in the early days and throughout COVID, on advertising, typically because we literally had no other way to truly get our brand out to people in a way that they would trust it and relate to it, other than us just flyer bombing the entire of central London, which, again, who you're not sending flyers to high net worths and galleries and stuff. It just doesn't really compute. So that, not to say we didn't try that, by the way. But again, that was another experiment. So you kind of like, right, well, I guess the next best evil here is a 2 grand, spread or tiny little advert in some physical broadsheet newspaper that we know these people read, Financial Times, that kind of stuff. You can at least measure it once you've done it. You're trying to feel your way through, I think, a lot of the time.
That might be a good jumping off point then. Why don't you actually tell me and everyone else watching and listening to this, what is your business? Who is it for?
Yeah, so Arcarta is a customer due diligence platform for the fine art market. And we allow any art business, so that could be an auction house, Christie's, for example, Sotheby's, Bonhams, could be a huge contemporary gallery, White Cube, Pace. Some of these will have global presences, or agents, and anyone in between, really. So anyone who's dealing in works of art, we allow them to comply with the challenging regulations that they face when they're selling and dealing in works of art. To add some more detail to that, this is things like anti-money laundering regulations, bribery, corruption, that kind of stuff. In the UK specifically, which is where we kind of took off from, galleries and any art business is required to do this by law now as of 2020. So they are looked at a very similar way as a bank would look at you as an individual. You can't open up a new bank account without providing ID, proof of address, sometimes proof of funds, doing some sort of KYC on the transaction, etc. All these traditionally quite slow to adopt and slow to move, quite steadied and traditional in their working style, let's say,
Mhm.
have now had a bit of a culture shock where they have to do all this really complicated stuff and think like a bank. And obviously, you selling fine art in your Mayfair studio with a very small team, all you've done all your life is buy and sell art to your friends and collectors. Now you've got all this burden to deal with. So yeah,
And
that's where we.
it's a completely different skill set too. It's not something that's immediately familiar. I get that.
When
How did you meet your co-founder? Like, what's the origin story?
we actually met back at the same company we used to work at, a design sort of experience design company based in the UK. We actually, ironically, never worked together. We were in different teams, but we always got on as people. And I quit my job after a brief stint in San Francisco to go and become a freelance contract product designer. So I went and did that for a while, spent some time in various places. My business partner and now co-founder had also, not to my knowledge because I was in the States, he'd disappeared off and done some other stuff. Long story short, I got a offer from a freelance client for quite a chunky piece of freelance work, basically a studio project essentially in its size. It needed a good few people on it for a number of months, some of which was outside of my skill set. So I rang my co-founder and said, I don't know what you're doing now, but I've heard that you're also doing some of the freelancing stuff. Do you want to come and have a look at this? We got our heads together, pitched for the work, won the work, decided to start our own small agency. And that's what led to doing I think about 18 months worth of studio work. So we did that for a little while. Then we said, wouldn't life be great if we just built some of our own stuff? And then that led to a series of spectacular failures and overspending. And, not to use any crude language, arsing around for quite a long time, not knowing what we were doing, basically.
I one of the things I've noticed is that if I asked an American this, they'd say, "Oh no! I had this plan from the very beginning. I knew it." Talk to a Brit about it. It's like, yeah, well, it took us a little while to figure it out,
Well,
But it always does. It always does. I don't think I've met anyone who was successful who said, "Yeah, we nailed it from the very beginning. We exactly knew what we needed to do, and we just executed perfectly the first time around." There's always pivots and ups and downs, and I think that there's what I've noticed is a really common pattern where people will start off with an agency or freelancing or doing some kind of service business, and then use that as a stepping stone to get into a SaaS business. And you guys did exactly the same thing. What was the moment where was there a trigger point where you decided, hey, we need to have our own software business and get out of the service side of things? Or was there a reason for it that made you decide, did you have a bad client? Did you have a project that kind of fell through, or was there some moment that made you decide, we need to get out of services and into SaaS?
Yeah, the one main thing and then one sort of secondary thing. The biggest piece was actually that first, or maybe it was the second piece of big work that we got. It was like a whole rebrand, app design, we just did everything for this company. And they were a great client because it was like an umbrella of loads of small kind of SaaS-y application-based services. So once we did one, they said, oh, we've also got this payment infrastructure we want you to have a look at. So we got good work from this particular client. Fast forward 12 months, the first piece of work that we delivered, and it was our first project working together, we were so happy with. We kind of overspent, really. They gave us a budget and we hired a videographer to do a little ad that lived on the website that had a video in the background. Just really nice, objectively, really nice stuff. It all looked great. It was really cohesive. They had a brand book. My business partner nailed the copy and the marketing collateral. It was just a really nice little product, a really nice little project. And we were stoked to hand it over and be like, here you go, sir. Congrats. Thank you. Here's the invoice, etc. Fast forward, we were looking back to see how that work had been implemented, because our understanding at the time, as with most studios and contracts, is that the idea is that the work that you do sees the light of day. What they'd done with it was not what we handed over. Let's just put it that way. And bearing in mind, after this point, we'd kind of began to get a little bit fatigued with just constantly doing client work as well. We're kind of getting a little bit tired. We're kind of asking ourselves, what next? Are we just going to do this for forever, for another 10, 15 years or what have you? And seeing that was like the icing on the cake. We just kind of said, if we can't have pride in, we can have pride in the work that we do, but we can't control what happens after it goes over the fence. So I guess that's probably why a lot of SaaS, founders, and to your first point, scratch their own itch, which is something we can talk about as well. It's such an easy stepping stone to go, I want to make my own path. I want to control this thing. I want to build it. I want to launch it. I'll take control of this thing. I'm not going to give that to someone else to do. The only problem with that, and we made every mistake in the book with this, by the way, in our first venture, is you're emotionally attached to your idea, not potentially what the customer is actually, if there even is a need, I should say. And you might not even have an itch. Your itch might be, I want to build stuff. But the world doesn't care about people building stuff, unfortunately. Not if you want to have a business, anyway. If you want to make a charity, then go ahead. There'll be a sea of people just building stuff for free, and that's great. But from at least a kind of a revenue perspective, if that's what you're going for, there'll probably need to be some sort of underlying need there. And the biggest journey that we've been on from that point, and the reason why I mentioned my co-founder again, is because there's an ego death, at least for us, that occurred, which is where you release the idea that you have all the answers, that you know what this thing needs, and you instead turn it completely around and think, I have a rough idea, we do have ideas, but we can't possibly truly know what that client wants until we start a dialogue. And that dialogue might be through a product, and it could be through something really crappy, which is, again, the MVP. Don't ship too late and just start working on something. We were the exact opposite of that. We built something so big with so much cash that we felt had nailed it. And surprise, surprise, we weren't even in the right ballpark. And you look back and go, how could you have been? Like you've just said there, what are the odds that you're going to completely and go, no, Ryan, don't even talk to me. I know what I'm going to do. And you go off, build it all, then launch it, and then it just happens to skyrocket. The odds are so small, it's laughable. But I think you have to go through, back to your guy with the influencer marketing stuff, kind of have to go through some of this stuff and just pray that you don't lose enthusiasm, lose all of your resources, or make any mistakes that are so big you can't come back from them. Everything else, I think, is just part of the progress, part of the course.
How did you know that your co-founder was the co-founder? Like, was there a moment where you thought, yep, this is it, this one?
Yeah, really, really good question. Yeah, because this is quite deep stuff. I knew he was good, and I always thought of myself as good in what I did, and I could see like a kindred spirit in that. Back to the kind of A player thing, we didn't tolerate bad quality work of each other as well. If one of us was trying to do something maybe that wasn't quite there, we would always challenge each other. So there's a really healthy push-pull. But what actually did it was when things got really rough, during some of these seas of mistakes and pivots that we went through, we both later talked about the fact that we independently of each other both made ourselves like a deal that we just wouldn't stop. So I told myself that I wouldn't stop, and he told himself that he wouldn't stop. And as a result, we were both fully committed. And if you're both committed, then you're not going to get halfway down the road and then someone's going to say, sorry, I need to duck out. I'm done. We were both kind of chips in. Let's do it. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be quick, but you only have to get it once right. You only have to get it right once, and then could potentially change quite a lot of stuff.
I know when people talk about co-founders, quite often that the analogy that people use is it's like getting married. It's like finding
Yeah.
a husband or a wife. I know my old business partner Sam. The advice that a mentor gave me is when you're going to find a co-founder and you're thinking about it, go out and get very very drunk with them. See how they handle it. See how you because if you guys can still be good friends in the morning when you're both hungover, that's a good sign there. But people kind of drop their shields a little bit too when they get a few drinks in them and all the rest of it. And we sort of found too, like the one of the things that really impressed me about Sam when we started working together, we've parted ways since. We kind of moved on to different things, but there weren't that many people in the world that I met that I respected the quality of their work. I think that's a really good filter. Like, is this someone that I genuinely think is world class at what they do? And that's your point about A players. If you're only ever going to hire A players, well, you've got to start with having a co-founder that you genuinely consider to be an A player, and they need to think the same of you. Yeah, it's interesting that you've had a similar kind of experience with that. Let's jump over and talk a little bit more about some of the pivots that you went through. So you said when we were talking earlier, it took you 4 years and 3 pivots to get to $1 million a year in revenue. What were those pivots, and what did you learn along the way? Hey, it's Ryan here. I'm glad you're enjoying the video. Listen, if you want to meet me or some of the people that I interview, you should really join the StartupSauce SaaS founder community. It's a private Slack group for SaaS founders based outside of Silicon Valley who are past the idea stage and want to focus on growth. About 30% of our members are doing over $1 million a year in revenue, so it's a pretty high caliber group. You'll get access to regular mastermind calls and workshops, and every week we share exclusive marketing tactics and resources that you can use to grow your business faster. So, if you want to give yourself an unfair advantage and learn from other SaaS founders who are 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, head over to startupsauce.com and sign up. I think there's a link in the description down below as well. Anyway, I'll see you in there.
The pivots were varied, but all sort of centralized around the market that we're actually in now, ironically enough. So it depends how much detail you want to go into, but we initially started building a marketplace for luxury goods, like a private luxury marketplace, mainly because that came from a need that we recognized where if you want to buy nice things, and I mean potentially branded, but also quite weird and obscure things like bureaus and furniture and, Herman Miller chairs or what have you, or vintage furniture, I should say, you're on eBay or you're kind of out in the world literally looking for this stuff. There are a few specialist services, but there weren't that many of them way back when we were playing with the idea. So having already had a small network of people that we knew who were doing various art fairs and stuff like that, we decided to build our own private, kind of like a members club for finding this really cool stuff. So again, with any marketplace, double-sided problem, supply, demand. We had no supply, no demand. So again, going into that, we kind of thought, well, where do we start first? We're not marketeers by default. We're product builders and designers. So we obviously gravitated straight towards supply. Built this beautiful system, which was like essentially a bespoke marketplace, I might add. So not even like a Shopify template or an off-the-shelf thing, from scratch.
Oh, wow.
A full e-commerce system that had a user account area, checkouts, shipping, a login for the dealer, for the owner of that particular work, messaging systems, everything, and a beautiful front end as well, which had password protections and accounts and stuff like that. Ironically, I actually found just yesterday one of the original invitations, a paper invitation that we'd sent out to these clients, right? And these clients were like private individuals in high net worth areas, and there's a few fancy estates in the UK in various postcodes that have very wealthy people living there. Famously, there's a place in Wilmslow, Alderley Edge, near Manchester, which is where all the football players live. Because obviously you've got City and United up around the corner. There's an influx of people around that neck of the woods. So we were just letterboxing and blanketing everyone with these slips. We did actually get a few people signing in. But in order to get them to listen, we built these, we designed these cards that were sort of yay big in a brown envelope with a wax seal with the brand on it. The whole works. They were handwritten inside with a unique code that they could use to get access to the site. We went to town on that. spent a fortune, and did get some interest, but just not enough interest. Again, on the demand side, we're talking about £80,000 Patek Philippe watches. We're talking about Aborigine sculpture and artifacts and God knows what else. And it's all quite random but cool stuff if you're into that sort of thing. We realized quite quickly that we would need to find a way to stay alive. Money was obviously dwindling. We weren't doing any consultancy stuff at this time as well. So we decided to build this is kind of the first pivot into building a system that would allow us to power the websites of the people that supplied product to the site. A bit of kind of like a Shopify inception. So imagine every Shopify store in the world was connected to one mothership Shopify, and all the product would filter up into it. That was kind of our plan for this, so that we could power all the independents, but all the stock of the independents would also flow into our marketplace. Therefore, creating a revenue source for us for powering the sites, and supply is now automated. And we could get that done and literally turn our efforts onto demand. That, however, because we had, it was myself and my business partner, very little money at this point, really didn't have the money to be investing in building the things themselves. So it was a really, really slow burn. And it just became quite apparent quite quickly that this probably wasn't going to work very quickly. It wasn't going to work and be, I don't know, just wasn't going to be a route forward that we felt confident in. It was taking too long. We didn't have the resources. We could have gone and raised some money, but on what? What's the pipeline of business like? There's not really that much happening. It's quite disruptive as a method to adopt and get those clients in. It's not easy to change websites. It's not easy to move all your product over. And again, we're talking to people who aren't technologists. They're not, on the most part, progressive thinkers in the technical sense. They are thinkers and experts in other areas. So we're trying to go in and say, drop your tools for a second and faff with this and give us some money and do this, that, and the other. It just didn't quite work. So that was kind of the first, or in this case, the second pivot. We, through building those sites, however, got to know a really interesting guy who dealt in handbags, like really rare Hermes handbags. The Birkins are a common example. They only make a certain number of those and they restrict the supply, but they also have ultra rare, like alligator skin in white. And they're like hen's teeth. You can't find these things very easily. He was a dealer in those products. We actually powered his site through our system that we built. He had a very, very unique need to handle payment on a global scale. Obviously had a lot of Chinese clients, a lot of Asian clients, and needed checkout conversion, integration with Stripe and ways to handle all this stuff while having a website. And we could also benefit from the supply on our main site. That led to a bit of an experimentation phase where we managed to speak to loads of people in the space about the problems they were facing with payment. And it came down to no retailer, and I say retailer, somebody who can power the point of sale systems, likes big transactions. If someone wants to try and put through $100,000 transaction for a piece of fine art, just usually was causing some issues for obvious reasons. The second piece was invoice fraud and interception. So this was a massive problem. And people were doing deals on napkins and writing account numbers down on Post-it notes and just saying, yeah, Ryan, send me the money to this thing. It was carnage. And to some extent still kind of is. So you add on now the stuff we're talking about, the regulation and compliance, people's heads were just exploding. But that wasn't to come yet. So we ventured into the payment space, specifically in the high value goods sector. And our two first ever clients for that was one of the most infamous UK jewellers based in London that's got warrants from the Queen, and the biggest and most prolific classic book dealer as well that's also got warrants from the Queen. So it's quite funny as well. There's an experience that you're talking to these businesses who've got the stamps and the royal warrants on their door, then they deal with the royal family and the royal estate. And, you're two guys from the north of it. wandering in like, hey guys, we've got some SaaS stuff to talk to you about and payment stuff. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But they jump-started that payment piece. And even to this day are actually still clients because that unit of the business still actually exists. But that then led to a whole number of different questions. To our conversation about category design. We were really, up to one point, a layer on top of Stripe with some other quite difficult stuff to work out. Very difficult for them to easily adopt and understand what we were doing. Some businesses weren't as progressive and wanted to accept money of those volumes over cards. So just taking another step back, looking at that objectively, seeing the transaction volume going up and earning some percent from this, still not really a business. Nice to see, and it's good, and it is disheartening. But what we noticed by this point is like the Dunning-Kruger effect. When you first start out, you're on the peak of Mount Stupid. You're really confident, but you know nothing. Over time, we started to learn more, but our confidence kind of stayed quite steady. The ego sort of took a step back, and we just went, what is the problem here? What do these people need? Where might there be something that we can actually not even build a business from? Because again, it's not what we think, it's not what we believe. It's about what actually is the need here. Is there even a need? Should we just completely step away? And the thing that sort of put a bookend on that final pivot was we spent probably about 2 days in my co-founder's kitchen. And I lived with him at this point, by the way. So talking about growing close together, we were basically married at this point, living in the same room, cooking meals together and eating, tiny 50p pizzas and living on beans, the whole shebang. We did an exercise, and this is again from our experience design days now. We had little post-it notes that covered the entire kitchen. And we just said, well, let's write down everything that we've learned and everything that we know to be true. And we just blanketed the entire kitchen. And when we finished, we could stand there and go, what have people told us? What's the lay of the land like? What's the landscape? Where have we had successes? Where do we place our bets here? Like, or do we just stand back and say there is nothing here that we can help with? And this is, again, my business partner's brain firing now. He became aware of the upcoming changes to the law and strategically saw the kind of chess pieces of, we're in a space now where we're dealing with transactions. The next thing then is securing the people with the transactions. So we started to design for that. So the final pivot over the Christmas period of, I think it was 2019 into 2020, was extending the product from being a payments business into a payments and people business. Lo and behold, January 2020, the regulation hits and the UK law changes. We already had a little bit of a footing in the payment space, so the name was out there in a market of people who needed it. When the regulation changed, the phone was off the hook, and it was just carnage, in a good way. So, yeah, that's kind of the journey from beginning to end for that period.
Coming back to what you're talking about, the being like designing for being a category king or queen, it sounds like you need to be in the market for a while to really deeply understand the customer well enough to be able to find those insights. Is that something that you found? Because like when you explain the pivots step by step like that, you can see the logical leap from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, that led to where you are now. But it wouldn't have been immediately obvious from the very beginning. You couldn't have gone from the original marketplace business straight to the people and payments regulatory business that you've got now. Without all those intervening steps in between. One question that pops up a fair bit is, how do you know when you just need to keep on grinding through, or when it's time to pivot the business?
I don't think there's an easy answer for that. I would say being really realistic would probably be what I would say to that. And again, this has come through our failures and learning, which is when we were in the position looking at what's now become our business. It's very easy to look at what's happening and be unemotional and completely realistic and look at what the future looks like. We can see kind of 6 months ahead typically, or at least, a number of months ahead. And that's usually a combination of income, deal flow, for example, like what are the leads like, who are you talking to, what's the product doing? If you're doing that, and it's all literally mostly we'll do this with product, or we'll assume that one big partnership is going to change everything, these would be like red flags for me, which is, I think it says a guy Kawasaki that said partnerships are for losers. And you can kind of see, because it sort of plays into that idea that, well, the business sucks right now, we've got nothing, but we'll just get that one big client and everything will take off. Well, I would argue, let's plot down your projected income realistically for the next 6 months. And if it's zero and there is no path to getting to $10 or $15, because the other thing that happens as well, and we see this now, and some of the people that I kind of mentor and speak to and advise, is they're looking at $1 million or whatever in 12 months' time, and yet they've not charged anyone for a single penny yet. And I've still kind of struggled with that sometimes, because there's almost like a shyness around selling. I don't know whether that comes from the engineer, perhaps, who's maybe a bit not ashamed, but dubious to start charging for something that they feel is yet incomplete, perhaps, or they just don't have experience in sales. It's probably a blend of things. And I'm not speaking ill of engineers. I'm just saying, again, with the co-founder piece, you need someone or in the team who can pick up the slack with that and say, if I'm a really good tech person, I need someone who's got a stone wall approach to nailing deals and is in for that. So I'd be looking at where you're at and just literally realistically saying, how do I get to milestone number one? And that milestone, again, for us, we literally just said, if we can get to £1,000 a month, that'd be great. We're asking ourselves these huge questions just yet, because if you can get to £1,000, there's your answer, right? It's like, okay, well, there's nothing here then, is there? If we can't figure that out, then we're kind of screwed. We're doomed, really. We're definitely not going to get to, hundreds of thousands a year and onwards. It's going to be quite a struggle. And we did exactly that with the payment side. Although that still lives on now and it's a supplementary piece to our business, if we'd have relied solely on that, I think we would have fallen into, well, one, it just wouldn't have been enough to get to survive for long enough to stay in the game. And two, would have fallen into the trap, like you mentioned at the beginning, which is we'd be another service that can offer auxiliary services around payment. Yes, we're in a unique market. We might have a unique point of view, and that's not to say we could have gone full category design on that as well. We perhaps may have done, but we just didn't see it being as worthwhile. There wasn't really a business case there for that. And again, too much of that particular approach was based on the product of another partner. In this case, it was Stripe. Since then, we've evolved it, and we've got loads of our own services that run through payment. So if Stripe said tomorrow, see you later, we'd be okay. But back then, it was like, we and Stripe are inseparable. So if Stripe suddenly kicks us off the platform, our rodeo stops completely. So you don't really want to be in that position while not earning any money, while not being different, and you're just kind of like, yeah, this is probably not going to work.
How many red flags do you want someone to wave? Like, that's
yeah. I mean, looking back now, it's really easy, and I'm glad we did that, because there were times where we were even pitching for funding and to be part of an accelerator, and we had a slide deck that had the transaction volume through the platform in a 12-week period. It was hundreds of thousands. It went like from zero, boom, up and to the right, and we were buying into our own sort of, collateral, almost like our own confidence. We were like, this is working. People have raised money for less than this. Like, look at this thing, and like showing this giant slideshow. But then behind that is, okay, how much would we have to turn over here to earn our 3% commission or whatever else? How many people can we convince to give us a subscription that's really worthwhile? how long would that take? And we looked at it and said, probably not going to work. The final thing on the partner side was we did that. We did exactly that, which is we found someone who said, we've got 300 businesses that would like to use your services. Let's partner. We did that, and guess how many came back and actually used our services?
How many?
One. One.
Oh, that's a killer.
That was where we went, right, okay, so this is where we're at. It's not urgent enough. It's not a big enough problem. Yeah, it's probably not going to work. We need to change something here.
But you said when you made that pivot, the last pivot into being payments and people and the regulatory side of things, the phone was ringing off the hook. Is I think for someone who has yet to find product market fit, what does product market fit feel like? Because you definitely would have experienced it in that moment.
We did feel a little bit of product market fit with the payment stuff, which is again why this is again, it's like an art, not a science. It's a difficult thing to quantify. There's gut feel in there as well, and the realism side of it, and there's a passion piece as well, which is by this point we didn't really even know what would work. We just sort of said we're at the mercy of the market because the market's going to tell us whether we've built something useful. So even with the people side, the due diligence piece, we'd done that, I guess, assuming strategically that that would be something that would be useful. But you're still waiting for that feedback. It's really when you feel true pull from your client. And because you could argue we were right place, right time, and we'd attached our little product at the time to something that we know would be urgent, unavoidable, and quite unique in this space, we'd kind of gone, if that's not going to work, then I'll be surprised. But still being able to step back if it didn't work out. Because it could have easily just gone, COVID came at the wrong time, no one cares, nothing happens. But with this market in particular, product fit for us was somebody who is progressive wanted to solve the problem. They solved it. We helped them solve it. They told their friend next door, who's also quite progressive. And what happened is we were early enough and active enough in the space, as in like listening and building and, client number one, Ryan, okay, what can we do better here? What's your team internally telling you that they need to achieve? And we leveraged all the consultancy experience at this point. But we didn't bloat the product too much. So we were listening, but we just said, how can we take all that feedback and build the best product for this particular need, not build something for everybody? Because again, we've made those mistakes. So product market fit for us felt like we were actually having people pulling us, ringing us, not the other way around. We weren't the ones knocking on the doors with the royal warrants and saying, hey guys, do you want to do this thing with this thing? They were calling us. People were quoting our name as people who were actually helping with certain things.
Right.
We, most importantly, were receiving income from it. That it was valued. That's the biggest pull of all. If someone says to you, I'm going to give you X amount of money per month, every month, and I'm going to sign a contract with you, that I don't know what else you would need to tell you that someone's taking your thing seriously. And that, again, why it confuses me sometimes that people shy away from charging for stuff. Because if you open that door and say, do you care enough to kind of vote with your feet and actually give me that or give us that revenue and commit to it, it is a commitment. And that pull and the commitment to us said, we've got market fit here. We've listened to the need. People are paying for it. People are using it and fixing a real problem. How do we make sure we can take as much of the market as possible? And yeah, that's basically it.
So when you're talking about the art world in particular, now, you know far more about this than I do, but my impression is that the art world is very cliquey, very closed off, probably not full of early adopters. How do you break into a market like that?
There's a few things that we did in retrospect through the initial experiences with the marketplace and all the way through to now. And I think there are three bits that even today we do, and ironically stumbled into through various bits of experimentation. Giving first where you can is always good. So we, rightly or wrongly, did these big expose pieces on certain deals or art businesses with really big reputations. So a jeweler in London called Bentley and Skinner, for example, again, they deal in tiaras and things for royalty and stuff like that. Crazy place, really cool, really unusual folks that work there, experts in what they do, beautiful location, as you can imagine. So they're quite interesting people to talk to. We wanted to get them as a client on our marketplace, so we did an expose on them as like an article, like a review, a piece of marketing, essentially. So it allowed us to give them a voice to share their business before we were asking for, oh, by the way, do you want to have a website powered by us? Do you want to put your stock on our site? Everything else. So giving something first, building a way to get some rapport going, get a relationship going with that individual or that business. Second thing, being useful where you can be. So we were giving and being useful most of the time. That could be something simple as not trying to get them to buy from you and instead giving them advice, helping them along with something, offer some advice or an ear on a certain issue. Again, with payment for us, that was a good thing. We would go around the art fairs in London and Mayfair, and we would just listen to people's problems. And it became like a therapy thing. But we were, meanwhile, building up this knowledge base of on-the-ground issues. But we were just being useful. We're in the space. We want to help. What are you struggling with at the moment? And they just talk and tell you because you're a nice guy. You're coming to wander around. You're looking at the stuff. You've got, a good demeanor, and you're generally a good person, and you're interested. They would find that quite useful. Giving technical advice where you can, because all these people were pretty much non-technical. So I believe even our business partner would go around, and when he said he worked in tech, someone with like an iPad would say, "Oh, can you fix this for me?" It's just like random stuff like that. So that would be good as well. And then finally, the networking piece. So being a face in the world that you want to operate in. And I think this is probably why it's quite tricky in the light of COVID and everyone working remotely and stuff like that, that we did a lot of both pre-COVID, some during, but especially afterwards when the lockdowns eased. We got back on the ground. We were out on the curbs, outside the stores of these galleries. We were in the same spaces. We were in the networking events and the fairs, some in Europe and around the world. We were kind of constantly melting the ice and became a face amongst that world. So that when we were able to offer something that was truly useful, you weren't coming from a cold place. And the biggest thing for that particular market as well was trust, which I know we can come on to in a minute as well about winning that business then. But you needed to be a trustworthy individual. And one way that I think you can do that from the beginning is being persistent. So if you are going to show up, keep showing up. You don't want to be someone who dips in, changes their mind, disappears again, and then comes back like 6 years later and with something completely different. We know of people like that, and it's not looked at very kindly, or not looked at with great excitement, because it usually means you're a person who doesn't do what they say they're going to do, or they don't know what they're doing, which is fine. Even if you look like you know what you're doing and stay somewhat consistent and you're turning up and you're present, that actually helped us lay a lot of groundwork for when we did have something that was actually useful, which is where we are now.
So that initial contact, was it cold calling? Was it emailing? Was it literally knocking on doors? Was it going to art fairs and like physical, like face-to-face networking events? Like what was the initial point of contact that you had with a lot of these people?
We did absolutely everything to begin with. We sent flyers, we did advertising, we went to art fairs, we cold called, knocked on doors, Just literally wandered up and tapped on the door. I think I remember telling you a funny story about when we had our business cards that we were really proud of, that were really expensive. And we went to one jeweler who literally all they sell is tiaras for like princes and princesses and royal families in Europe. And there's just a glass front with a bodyguard on the door. We turned up with no appointment. Bearing in mind, pretty much all these places are appointment only. They don't allow walk-ins. And we showed our business card to this humongous bodyguard on the door. He glanced at it, walked in, disappeared for 5 minutes, came back out and opened the door for us. We always thought it was funny that the card is what got us through the door. At the time, we didn't have anything useful to sell them or to work with them on, but that's not the point. So we just did a lot of that, a lot of curb stomping, a lot of walking up and down the streets. What did help in the early days was pulling in advisors, people to help us. So one of our investors actually is very knowledgeable in the space as well and has a big network. So you can get in certain ways and build that trust and that rapport. It's not easy. I can't speak to any other market, but I imagine the same is in real estate, for example, where you're going to be needing to go to the best brokers in your area, try and find a way in. And if you can get a way in, work with them enough so they trust you to do something else. But yeah, we tried absolutely everything. But again, with the idea that you only need to get it right once, if we could get one client and do a really good job for them, their name becomes currency to use somewhere else. So we weren't thinking too kind of far ahead. We were very much sort of quite basic in our initial approach. We need one client, we need a little bit of money so we can keep the lights on and we can keep growing. And if we can keep doing that, we can keep making the product better by listening to this person. He'll keep beating the drum and telling his friends or her friends that we're doing good stuff. And lo and behold, one would just trickle in after the other. And it was very, very steady. But that steadiness for months and months on end is really all you need. So, yeah.
It snowballs. Yeah. I have a lot of respect for that kind of hustle. I think that's lost a lot in the SaaS world. There's remember a while back we had one of the guys in the StartupSauce community said, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to make any masterminds for the next couple of weeks because I'm doing this big road trip across the US and I'm going to go and visit all of our customers face to face and a whole bunch of people that I've been talking to that I want to become customers." And everybody on the call was kind of shocked a bit, and they thought, "Hang on, like you're getting up and leaving the office and meeting people face to face. That's a thing you can do." And I think sometimes, particularly techies, the world that we're in, we kind of get so caught up in like, okay, if we're going to get customers, well, that means we need to do SEO. That means I need to be, writing blog posts or doing Google ads or doing all this stuff. And sometimes the easiest, fastest way is just to go and knock on someone's door and say hello. And it sounds like you've been able to, between that, the events, the everything else, and inserting yourself into that world and getting a name and a reputation, being a face, as you said. It feels like that's the right approach, I think, especially in a world that's, maybe a bit more bricks and mortar, a bit more kind of old school in the way that they approach things. They need a human interaction to be able to feel the trust, to be able to do that. Let's talk about trust for a moment, because that's got to be huge in particular, like in every world, but particularly in your world. How do you think about trust, and what do you do to establish trust and to nurture that trust with customers or potential customers?
We do quite a few things, actually, and again, it's a really good question. Trust for us is multifaceted, so it falls into, even from the get-go, before we even get an inquiry from a potential client, they need to see themselves amongst the other people that use our services. So the network effects of playing back to our market, the fact that we work with the market, and these are the people that we work with, and these are the big names, they'll know those names, or it's like they'll know someone who works at said place and so on. So there's a big trust piece there, which kind of comes just out of the gates by just having a presence in the space.
Mm-hmm.
So leveraging the network is one bit. We adopt quite a consultative approach, actually, to stuff that we do now. We've systemized a lot of stuff, and we obviously have a sales team and I hate the word sales, but a discovery team who will walk through what we do and how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And even our support team, we're still very hands-on where we can be. We realize that for these people to trust what we do, it needs to look like we care. It needs to look like we take things seriously, and we respect their reputation as well as our own. So, for example, because of the value of these things, that the works that are typically involved, there's one gallery that we work with, for example, whose lowest item that you can buy from them is $3 million. You go there, sort by low to high. The lowest thing is billions now. The lowest thing is $3 million, which is just bonkers. But imagine that sale not going through because of something going wrong during that amount of money. And yes, you could argue it's probably high value, low volume, but there are companies and companies that we work with who do a lot of stuff a lot of the time for really big values. And if we're getting involved in some of that, either through the payment side or through security or through interfacing with their client to do some of the KYC stuff, we're involved in that process. So we need to make sure that we are also understanding the uniqueness of their situation, the trust they need to have with their buyer. And then it's kind of a symbiotic sort of relationship where they need to trust us to then put us in front of their buyer, who then needs to also trust us. So there is a lot of pressure and a lot of emphasis on everyone taking this stuff seriously. So we even have links now footer for some of our client-facing forms for buyers and collectors. And we have special pages where we talk about who we are, what our role is. It's a very delicate balance, and we've had to design for that from the beginning. And in regards to trust as well, I think a lot about how you approach them as well. There's kind of like a weird thing with this market where if you are seen to be too needy, then it implies that, I don't know what it implies. It implies that it's a bit of a turn-off, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. So we don't really operate like that either. We tend to sort of be quite selective as well. And in some respects, we are quite selective. If we have a client who isn't in the right space, either through an understanding of the product, what they need to do, or a pricing concern, when we literally can't work with them, it becomes quite difficult to work with these kinds of people. So we actually reserve the right to not work with anybody because we're all trying to solve a very, very difficult problem. And we need people who are invested in helping solve that difficult problem. So, yeah, I know there's a lot of weird dynamics with this market.
Last time we chatted, you said something interesting. You said that pricing is IP. What do you mean by that?
The way you arrive at your price, providing you taking the category design and the POV stuff seriously, or at least doing some of that, means that you shouldn't be competing on price. But one thing you will do is create your price. That has to come from somewhere. It typically comes from God knows how many rounds of iteration and testing, some of which is going to be painful, showing one price to one client, another to another, seeing which one gets the most friction. We saw something called Price Intelligently, and it's quite interesting. It talks about pricing psychology. It talks about why certain companies always seem to be putting the prices up. It talks about how you can find your pricing kind of area, your sweet spot, if you like. And I remember there was one piece that said, it was quite hardcore, and we don't do this, by the way, but this was pretty aggressive, and I think it's because it was a bigger SaaS example that was given. It said something like, increase your price by 25% every year until you get a certain number of churn. So you just keep pushing it, and where that kind of wall is, you go, okay, there we are. That's our price tolerance. Now, we didn't do it that way. We just experimented our way to finding that sweet spot. And we felt the wall when we would have pushback from the clients.
Mm.
To your question, I would argue that all of that work and all of that effort is unique to you and your team. You've had to literally go through all that. So why would you share outwardly and openly to the wider market, including potentially your competitors, or at the very least, people in your competitive landscape who are looking to become one of the people you mentioned at the beginning, who goes, Ryan's killing that, I'll do the same, and just go, I'll lower his price slightly. Keeping your price back is good for that. Of course, clients ask us, and we can give them a range. But we give them a range once we're in conversation. Pricing on the front door to us implies a grab it and go sort of supermarket mentality, which is not what's right for this market. So again, down to the market, down to the audience. Our clients, although they'll hate it because they can't get a price, they themselves put price on acquisition on their works of art. So it's ironic that they're asking us for prices and we're saying, well, what's this priced? There's a bit of a psychological game here, which is you show me you understand what it is you're even buying, and I'll give you the price for something. For us, that's about, we need to know what you even need before we can give you a price. I don't know, Ryan, whether your gallery sells one piece of work every other day, or you've got 50 galleries around the world and you're basically a blue chip enterprise that's on the public stock exchange somewhere. I can't give you a price, can I? Because think of the range of that.
Yeah.
I can try, but it's going to get really messy. It also implies or gives a behavior that we don't particularly like, which is tell us how much it is, and we'll use that as like the one thing to define whether we're going to take it or not, which then forgets all the other cool pod stuff, which is some of our other unique IP from the category stuff, what the product actually does, the support system, and all the other good stuff. It gets into a pricing war. And again, back to the start of the conversation, we want to be playing at tables where we can win most of the time. And we can win most of the time if there's an understanding.
And you're having a conversation and you're talking to them, because once you've got the conversation piece, you've got opportunities to ask questions, you've got opportunities to tailor things to them, and that makes so much sense. So a couple of quick last questions. What advice would you give to other SaaS founders who are maybe one or two steps behind where you are now and really trying to move towards that first $1 million a year in revenue?
Keep looking for what's going to move the needle forward. And what one person thinks might do that versus another person will probably be very different. I'm guilty of thinking that making the product better is going to move the needle. It often doesn't. It will potentially help produce churn. Like if your product is really bad and things are broken and slow, then of course it's going to bring the needle back to zero. But I'm talking about actual growth, new customers, new clients. That's going to be the thing that's probably going to move things forward. You're at some point on that journey going to have to replace yourself. So that means delegating stuff. And if you're anything like me, that could be quite a tricky and mentally strange thing to go through, especially if you have a control freak. You're going to have to kind of hand that stuff over at some point. Like I said at the beginning, somebody needs to be guiding the ship at some point. And what you did to get to where you are today might not be the things you need to do to get to where you want to be. And that's exactly where that's that place you need to go to get that next 10% is going to probably be somewhere else. So putting yourself in that position, more experiments, looking for what's going to move the needle, doing some sort of delegation, and then trying to find a new kind of area to guide the business towards. That'd be my kind of three things.
And are there any, you mentioned a few, but are there any other books or tools or resources that you would recommend for other SaaS founders?
So only a few. I mean, there's obviously the play bigger, but the three big ones that spring to mind are From Impossible to Inevitable. That's Jason Lunkin, who, absolute legend. I found him on YouTube during COVID and was just kind of, his positivity, his approach is very systematic, which appeals to me. And that book is one of those ones you can pick up at different points in the journey, kind of leaf forward to. For example, we've only just built a proper sales and discovery team. We didn't have that before. So now I feel like I can kind of jump back to it now and say, now you're building a sales team. What does that look like?
Yep.
And I can jump in. At the beginning, it's about other stuff. That's a very cool one. It also systemizes, as per the title, how you can go from nothing to something actually quite big by just following roughly a series of steps. The other one would be 0 to 1, Peter Thiel. Obviously touches on category design, monopolies, and all that stuff in there as well. Then the third one, which is an interesting one, is how to be a capitalist without any capital, which is, I think it's Nathan Latka, I think his name is.
Yeah, yep.
He's also got a really cool YouTube thing where he interviews various founders and does the deal desk stuff and the live deal stuff. That was also cool to watch during lockdown. But with that specifically, with the book, talking about how you can just start small things up and everything doesn't have to be humongous and I'm not going to do anything unless I'm going to get to 100 million a year. And you kind of like, dude, you're going to be here a while if you're aiming for that and nothing else. I like that he's talking about build a small thing, buy a browser Chrome extension and play with it. It might not make you millions and it might not be the biggest thing in the world, but it's probably going to give you a foundation, a place to start. You can build a portfolio of little tools. You can meet some new people, provide some value, play with it a little bit and start from scratch, because you are usually starting from scratch. And rather than worrying about starting from, trying to jump too far ahead too early is quite common.
Fantastic. Matt, thank you so much, man. If anyone wants to learn a bit more about Arcarta or wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of mentoring on the side and take calls with founders and stuff like that. It's a little bit like founders therapy, kind of like we're doing now, where we're just talking about all the different challenges. I've got a site called human-review.co. So you can get in touch with me on there, and you can find it. Yeah, you can find a link to Arcarta from there as well, and a few other things that we've done. So
fantastic. Matt, thank you so much, mate. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.